The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thanks for standing by to today's webinar called Refugee Sponsorship Cases, How are Refugees Selected by Sponsors? My name is Sarah Shasia. I'm a project coordinator with OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, and I'm your facilitator today. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few technical details with you just to make sure that we make the most out of your participation in this webinar today. So you should see something like this on your desktop in the upper right corner. If you have a lot of windows open on your desktop, try to minimize them. If you don't see a screen right now, I have shared my screen with you, so you should be able to see this particular control panel and my presentation. So if you, so for some of you, this might be minimized. So this little arrow here might be blinking. If you click on it, it will open up the entire user panel. And this is important because of the Q&A session at the end of this of the presentations. It allows you to participate in the conversation, to ask a question or make a comment. You can either type your question here if you wish, or you would click on the hand icon over here, which blinks, ends up popping up on my end, and it allows me to unmute you individually. So just for the record, everyone is muted at the moment, and that's how it's set up in the GoToWebinar. We do have about 100 people registered for today's session, so it's a good idea to just keep everyone muted until the presentations are over. At that point, we will have at least 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and then you can either ask your questions directly, like I mentioned, or type your questions here. And so just before we begin, there were a couple of questions mentioned within the registration form that had to do with specific cases of people and how they can be sponsored to come to Canada. While today we are focusing on how the three guest speakers that we've invited, how they go about selecting a refugee case within their organization, we won't have the time to spend on discussing individual cases that you might have questions about. So, but there are resources out there to help with that. The RCP, which is a Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, is a great resource. You can call them, you can email them, you can also go on their website. They have a lot of information on there, particularly an Are You Eligible a part of their website. And they have multilingual resources as well. So just to show you really quickly, this is the RCP website. You can see here under refugees, I've clicked on Are You Eligible? And they go through the main eligibility criteria that our first speaker will also be reviewing. So if you're wondering about your own case, go through this list. If you have any, if you have other questions, feel free to contact RCP as well. Another website that is very useful is from the Canadian government. This is an official website, and they do have under their heading Sponsor a Refugee links in different languages, in 11 languages here for privately sponsored refugees and those who are being sponsored under the Blended Visa Office program. And if you wanting to connect with a sponsorship agreement holder directly, today's webinar is not going to be the place to do that. So we won't be matching anyone in today's webinar with SAS, but you can pick or you can see rather a list of all of the sponsorship agreement holders across Canada on this government website. You have to click the province and then you will get to see a whole list with addresses and so on and the name of the organizations. So these are just some key resources for you if you are someone overseas who've joined us today, or you are a settlement worker trying to get more information for your clients. These are good places to start. So this webinar is part of OCASI's Refugee Settlement Support Project. We call it Sharing Practices to Build Bridges. And this series really came about from roundtable discussions we've had with sponsors and settlement workers over the last year to clarify roles and responsibilities and increase transparency and also strengthen collaboration between refugee sponsors and service providers. So the idea for it and its topics came from focus groups and roundtables that we've held. So today's webinar is, as I said, on refugee selection. And if you want to watch previous webinars, we've recorded them and we have put them up on our website on Welcome Ontario. And I will show you the link again at the end of today's webinar, but it's up here as well. So we have 3 guest speakers today, and I would like to introduce to you our speakers today are Rebecca Walker from World Renew, which is the SA. We have Kwaka Kukubo from the United Church of Canada, which is the national SA, and Alex Manzour-Doorman from Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. So without further ado, I'm just going to give the go-ahead for Rebecca to start with her presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. This is Rebecca Walker from World Renew. I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start with some, like Sarah said, some general information about eligibility. So, you know, SAWS, when we are looking to sponsor a refugee to Canada, all of us need to be looking at these same factors.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now it's good again. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so all SAWs are looking at these criteria when assessing whether or not we can actually do a sponsorship of a refugee. So, you know, the criteria are like someone has to be outside of their home country. Somebody has to be outside of Canada. They have to have a well-founded fear of persecution from their home country, or they have to have been impacted and seriously and personally affected by civil war or armed conflict, also in their home country. And another criteria would be that they'd have no other long-term solution available to them. So they can't return to their country of origin and they can't integrate into their country of asylum where they're currently living. Now, this really is what SAWs are looking at, but I just should add for Group of 5 and community sponsors, there is the criteria for those groups that they have to sponsor refugees who have refugee status. So they have had their refugee status determination interview and they received recognition as refugees. So really, as SAWs, when we are looking at a case, you know, a family that comes before us, we're looking at the story, the refugee story, and seeing if it fits the definition here of Convention Refugee Abroad class or the country of asylum class. So the Convention Refugee Abroad class, so we're looking at, you know, does this applicant have a well-founded fear of persecution? And it has to be based on one of these criteria: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Or they could meet this other definition, country of asylum class, which is looking at situations of civil war, armed conflict, massive violations of human rights that take place in a home country. Like, for example, the Syrian crisis. There was a country of asylum class definition that could be used in those cases. So, like I said, that's basically it. Those are the criteria for a refugee to be eligible under the Private Sponsorship of Refugees program. So then maybe I'll just shift into who is World Renew, because that's the SAW that I work with. So World Renew is actually, it's an agency of the Christian Reformed Church of North America. So it's a binational church, Canada, US. World Renew is a national sponsorship agreement holder organization, and we have been sponsoring since the inception of the program in 1979. And our office is located in Burlington, Ontario. World Renew is actually the relief and development arm of the Christian Reformed Church, and we also have the private sponsorship of refugees program. We do not have a program working with GARs or claimants, not at this point anyways, and we are not a RAP, SPO, or a SPO, so we're not offering settlement services in that sense. But I'll explain a bit how we get involved with settlement later. So who do we sponsor with? Primarily, we work with constituent groups. And again, they can be constituent groups from across Canada. And they can be Christian Reformed churches, they can be churches of other denominations, other faith groups, or community associations. So the CGs can be made up of many different kinds of groupings. Individuals who do approach us to sponsor their family or friends from overseas, we ask them to connect with a constituent group. We really don't work with individuals that contact us. We really need to be working, it's our policy to be working with what we call CGs. So that's what we would direct individuals to do, is to link up with a constituent group. So then how are the refugees identified to be sponsored by World Renew? It's pretty much in primarily two ways: sponsor referred and blended visa office referred under that program. So under sponsor referred, the CGs are contacted by people in Canada to assist with the sponsorship. So again, a family member or a friend in Canada will approach a church or a community association, and they will ask them to assist them with sponsoring their family members, and then the CG would contact us for assistance with that process. So it's very responsive. We are responding to requests that come to us from constituents from across Canada. And many of our CGs, I think with many of the SAWs, are sponsoring family members of VIVORs who had arrived in earlier years. The other way, the other major way, I guess, in which we identify refugees to sponsor is through the blended visa office referred program. And in this way, when CGs contact us, they are interested in sponsoring, but they don't know, they don't have a family in mind, they don't have a refugee person identified. So in that case, then what we can do is we can go to the BVOR program, and we can hopefully try to find a match with that group that's asking for a family to sponsor. We also do work with the JAZZ program. We haven't worked with it as much lately, but we have done so in the past. I guess World Renew, we are responsive and we are proactive with the program. So we do a lot of reaching out, particularly to the constituent churches of the Christian Reformed Church. We do a lot of promotion of the program. So we do get a fair number of requests coming back to us for more information and hopefully for engagement in the program. So I guess the big question too is, how are the sponsorship requests managed by World Renew? And to start out with, we do keep a waiting list. We do get a lot of requests. And like I said, we don't really kind of put a group on our waiting list until there is actually a constituent group that is involved. And the groups that we put on the waiting list, they are very aware that they are on a waiting list. We make no promises because we are dealing with allocations, right? And we have a rolling waiting list is what I describe it. And so we just let people know it will depend on our allocations, if they can have a sponsorship with us, or if they can have maybe more than one sponsorship with us. So it's a lot of discussion with the CGs. Our step one, though, is we have a CG approval process and an awful lot of information sharing. And at this front end of the process, we are really trying to make sure that the CG is very aware of their responsibilities for the entire process of the application while it's in process overseas, and then of course for settlement. So we do have a checklist that we work through, and we do share the checklist back with the CGs. We do give them guidelines on how they work with their co-sponsoring families, because often they are working with the co-sponsoring family, and we ask that those guidelines that we do share out, they get signed and returned back to us. And again, it's all just trying to make it very clear what are areas of responsibility, and to ensure that there's a sponsorship committee in place, that they have a fundraising strategy in place, that they have thought through the settlement implications and how that's going to, and who the volunteers are going to be to help with that settlement. So that's a very important part of our process. It does take considerable time, but we do find if we put the front end work there, that it's very helpful as we move forward. Then the second step is that we do review the refugee story, and we are assessing for eligibility, just as I talked about earlier, and of course credibility too. I mean, we are assessing for credibility of the story as well. And then we are, step 3 is we assist, or we're completing the application documents. And every step that we engage with our CGs, we do provide a fair bit of resource information to them, so that they have, they can call us, of course, and we do a lot of talking on the phone, but we also send them an awful lot of information as well, including a lot of the RSDP trainings. We really encourage them to do the RSDP trainings. We do submit the applications as they are completed. Once we have our allocations, we do submit our applications as we receive them, and as they get finalized. We have held on to them in the past, and that did not go very well for us, because at the end of the year, it's very tough sometimes to get these applications done, and then we were left holding spaces. This was a long time ago when allocations were just starting, but we had to give away spaces because we couldn't possibly use them at the end of the year. So our practice is to submit them as we receive them, and as they get finalized. But we do, it's all managed within trying to be fair as well. Like, we wouldn't submit 10 applications for one CG because they happen to have them already. Not that that's ever happened, to be very honest with you, but we do make a big effort to balance and be fair. There's limited spaces. We are all working within this framework of allocations, which makes it very challenging, like very, very challenging. And we just do the best we can to ensure that we are being responsive, and that we are trying to put as many cases forward for as many people. And with new CGs, we wouldn't put as many cases forward either. We would certainly limit it probably to one family. So I guess I could say more about that, but I'll keep going because I think I have to be thinking about time here. But just a couple of points here about how we do support our CGs. Again, providing guidelines and resources for each step. So the inquiry step, the application. We give them lots of details about how to do the story, how to do the application documents, resources for the interview, resources for settlement in 113. I mentioned before the church readiness checklist, so we make sure that we work through that with all our CGs. We provide hands-on assistance with completing the application forms and submitting the application. We do the case management, so we're liaising with IRCC, with the visa posts, with Rocco, with UNHCR. We do the monitoring and record keeping of all our sponsorships. So we have a regular, we check in every 2-month point, at the 9-month point. We have monitoring forms that we are asking that the CGs complete to keep us up to date. We engage in advocacy activities within our church network as well, and we offer training in sponsorship and settlement. And then for what the CGs are responsible to do, they basically are responsible to contact us for resources and guidelines. They need to have a refugee committee. They need to have the CG approval to proceed. They have to have a budget and fundraising. They assist with the application process. And then the biggest part where the CGs come in is the greeting and welcoming at the airport, and then providing the settlement support, walking alongside the newcomers as they integrate into life into Canada. So I think that's it for me. So that was kind of quick, but anyway, thanks very much, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. So this was very informative, and I look forward to finding out from Quokka now about how it works at the United Church, and then we will take questions at the end after Quokka and Alex have presented. I think you have to click on slideshow at the top.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you for having us. My name is Huaka Kukubo. I'm the National Advisor for the Refugee Program for the United Church of Canada. And with me is Melody Moy, the Refugee Advisory Group member for the Toronto Conference of the United Church of Canada. So in 1988, the General Council established guidelines for the Church's refugee work. These guidelines are rooted in our faith tradition of hospitality to strangers, which is a fundamental concept of the Hebrew scriptures, and loving our neighbor is the crux of the Christian gospel. As Christians, we are called to welcome the stranger. We believe we owe a spiritual and moral obligation to each other. The obligation also means that we take reasonable measures to care for and protect the interests of the other. We know that the world's vulnerable, uprooted people, refugees, are a priority for the whole church. As the church, we are asked to respond to and address root causes, to provide solutions, to ensure asylum, to become personally involved, and that means to sponsor. We believe that refugees are the Christ figures we are called to welcome. And this is a sacred trust we hold. So just a brief about the refugee program. So the United Church of Canada has been a sponsorship agreement holder since 1979. The United Church of Canada is a national sponsorship agreement holder with a national office located in Toronto. We have a potential of over 3,000 constituent groups, CGs, across the country. The refugee program has 2 paid staff and 7 refugee advisory group members who work with the national office, congregations, and pastoral churches in their regions. So when we look at who the United Church of Canada sponsors, so we the United Church of Canada sponsor through our constituent groups, the CGs. We sponsor refugees, stateless persons, and persons facing refugee-like conditions as per ministerial instructions through all available PSR programs. So congregations sponsor named cases. We sponsor blended visa office referred cases, the BVOR. We also sponsor LGBTI refugees. We do joint assistant cases. We do visa office referred cases, and these are just to name a few. We have also been involved in various special initiatives, the most recent being the Tibetan Resettlement Project.
And I'm going to speak to how do we get our cases. Refugees contact the national office or congregations by telephone, email, or other methods of communication. If we have their numbers, we then send a special template to refugees directly to get more background and personal information in order to be able to create a refugee profile to share with our interested groups. Depending on the cases we receive, we share with congregations waiting to sponsor. Our overseas or national partners sometimes refer cases, often based on the humanitarian and compassionate levels. For example, women at risk, just to name a few. Depending on a particular case and need from the CG, we do a case determination based on information sent to us by refugees. How do we match our cases to congregations? We have a database of congregations that are looking for refugee families to sponsor. This listing will keep us informed on the congregation's location, desired family size, and what type of case they would prefer. Example, a JAS, BVRT, or privately sponsored, etc. When reviewing a case and searching for a sponsor, we will match based on the criteria outlined from both the refugee and the congregation. On a rare occasion, some congregations are given anonymous cases to review and given the option to sponsor. We also have a small list of refugee cases that are ready for sponsorship. Most of these cases include stateless persons and LGBT.
So just going to look briefly at named cases. So this is a very popular category of sponsorship within the United Church of Canada. So groups or congregations refer a refugee or refugee family in need of resettlement to us. And this is usually someone known through overseas contacts or through friends and relatives in Canada. Sometimes these are also cases that are from the echo effects of cases that had already been sponsored. We do a case determination at the national office, and if we have any allocations for this case, or if it's an LGBT or a Tibetan case, we give the group or the congregation a go-ahead to proceed with the documentation gathering and form completion. At times, if needed, we provide congregations and refugees with assistance when filling out the application forms. Other sponsorship agreement holders or in the group or congregations in the neighborhood or settlement agencies, or sometimes the RSTP staff persons help in the completion of the forms if required. Once applications are complete, the forms are sent to the national office for processing. We review the forms, check for case story, ensure all the forms are in order. Then once everything is complete, we submit that to ROCO. We provide IRCC with any additional information they may require from the refugee or the refugee family. The national office remains the first and last contact with IRCC's ROCO and the visa posts. We receive all notification on the cases from approval of the applications to the notification of arrival transmission. The blended visa office referred cases. Each region that the United Church of Canada has a refugee advisory group member has access and can select a BVOR case or a VOR case for groups or congregations in their conference. Each case is processed and submitted through the national office. Monitoring of each case is done by the refugee advisory group member of that region, plus the national staff and IRCC. Most of the named cases stem from sponsored BVOR cases. So for joint assistance sponsorship, the United Churches and United Church groups are often called upon to sponsor joint assistance cases. Most of our groups have experience and are open to the challenge of welcoming newcomers with various health or social needs. So we'll just look at how we track the refugee files. So in order to keep track of all our cases, we have a comprehensive and interactive database that keeps an up-to-date file of each refugee and their family members. It includes the date of birth, the country of origin, congregation information, and point of contact, as well as their intended destination. That's the intended destination of the refugees. This database is updated each time there's a change in the refugee file. The changes may include when this application is submitted to IRCC, when the file is accepted or withdrawn, when the family or the individual arrives to Canada, and if any sponsor contact information changes. When a sponsorship is complete, the database is able to send out a notification for the month 13 monitoring. So that's all we have for our presentation. So if there are any questions, we welcome them.
Great, thank you, Korka and Melody. And I can see there are already some questions coming in, which is great. We'll just hang on until Alex has also finished his presentation. Go ahead, Alex.
Let me know if you can see my presentation.
Not yet, we can hear you. Do you see the share my screen menu in your GoToWebinar panel? Okay, great. Now we can see it. But you have muted yourself, so just make sure you unmute.
There you go.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that.
That's good.
So my name is Alex Dugman Mansour, and I am the SAR representative for the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. And I'm also the refugee program manager. We run programs for refugees, for refugee claimants, and also we have a private sponsorship and resettlement program. Let me start a little bit giving you a context about the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. So the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto was founded in 1973 as a spiritual Christian community with main focus on social justice and LGBTQ plus rights. For those of you who don't know what LGBTQ plus stands for, it's lesbian, gays, bisexual, transgender, and queer, and other categories that are included there as well. This Christian church was established here in Toronto to actually provide a home that was inclusive to all people who believed that they wanted to experience their spirituality and their Christian spirituality without thinking that they would be rejected based on their gender identity or sexuality or sexual orientation. So what is the vision of the church? Is to be Canada's leading progressive, diverse community of faith. And the mission is to build bridges with a vibrant spirituality that transforms lives and transforms the world. And that is how the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, through their senior pastor, Reverend Brent Hawkes, was also the first reverend around the world to officiate the first gay wedding. And then it had an impact on Canadian society where a case was formed, and then the Supreme Court finally decided that same-sex, same-gender marriages can happen legally here in Canada. So speaking more specifically about the refugee programs or the refugee ministry that I manage currently. So the refugee programs run since 2007, and mostly the components of the program have to do with peer support programs for refugee claimants, private sponsorship and resettlement program, and communications, and also we have a lot of collaborations with other organizations, and we do a lot of advocacy around LGBTQ refugee issues, particularly with regards to refugee claimants and their access to services, but also with regards to having a program that allows us to sponsor LGBTQ people in a faster and in a wider way. In 2009, the church decided that the refugee ministry becomes MCC Toronto's, MCC Toronto being the way we talk about the Metropolitan Community Church, MCC Toronto Signature Social Justice Ministry. And then in 2013, we applied and we became a sponsorship agreement holder. And our mandate is that we are a sponsorship agreement holder to exclusively sponsor LGBTQ plus refugees. And what that means is that I think currently there are 110 sponsorship agreement holders nationwide, and we are the only ones who exclusively and only sponsor people who are being persecuted or who have risk to their lives due to their gender identity, their gender expression, their sexuality, or their sexual orientation. So in our private sponsorship and resettlement program, and as a sponsorship agreement holder, we have a few partners that allows us to do the sponsorship. So we work with constituents groups. Constituents groups can be organizations, charities, NGOs, or other churches who sign a memorandum of understanding with us. They understand that they want to sponsor LGBT people into the country. They understand that the ways that that sponsorship needs to happen and the people who need to be involved, they have to be very aware of the needs and special difficulties that an LGBTQ refugee may be going through. And one of our main sponsors, one of our main constituents groups is, for instance, Rainbow Railroad, who also does emergency travel for people who are being persecuted abroad. And they also sponsor people into the country, and we work in collaboration with them in putting those sponsorship applications. We also work directly with settlement teams, which are groups of 5 or more people who live in the community of the sponsorship, and the settlement teams might be representative of the person they will sponsor. And I know that some sponsorship agreement holders, as we heard at the beginning of the presentations today, work directly only with constituent groups because we are a church and we have only one organization, and we don't have many other churches that are linked to the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. We expand, and we believe that our community is beyond organizations that might be linked directly to us. So we expand that to work with other LGBT organizations who wish to do sponsorship. And at the same time, we work directly with our congregants, so the people that congregate in our church and other people from the community who come speak with us and say, we are interested in providing support for a person during a year or for a couple during a year. We also work with the Government of Canada, who sometimes gives us referrals for JAS cases and BVORs. The majority of the JAS cases that we have received has been usually transgender women that the Government of Canada believes they might need a little bit of extra help in assistance in settling in Canada because of all the difficulties that a trans person already faces just because of being trans, and then added the refugee component and the fleeing persecution and the added trauma sometimes. And so they make a commitment to provide the support for the particular person, an individual, and then we are their community sponsor. We also work closely, especially in JAS cases, with settlement agencies and COSTI. At large, we have a lot of partnerships with the LGBT community, and we depend on donors also for our sponsorship. So who do we sponsor? As I have mentioned before, we exclusively sponsor LGBTQ refugees. Who or what makes the LGBTQ refugees? And that is a person living outside of their home country to comply with the definition of a refugee according to the convention and also according to the Government of Canada, with no durable solutions, which they were already explained, and with a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country based on their gender identity or expression, if they are transgender, gender non-conforming, gender fluid, intersex, and other categories, which means, in other simpler words, that are people who do not conform to the binary of male and female, and they are being persecuted because of that non-compliance, or they're being persecuted in their home country based on their sexuality or sexual orientation because they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, asexual, and other categories. So anyone that doesn't conform to the gender binary, male, female, or anyone who lives their sexuality outside of what we would call the heteronormative or what is considered normative in our society, and who are being persecuted because of that same characteristic, those are the people that we sponsor currently. Now, why do we sponsor those people? And of course, it is because we are a Christian church that was founded to provide a safe space and an inclusive space for LGBT people, but also because currently there are 73 countries who in some way or another criminalize same-sex relationships and and other gender identities. And beyond a civil war or beyond other atrocities that may be going on in the world, even in countries where there's internal peace or there are no war or other armed conflicts, still an LGBT person can be persecuted. Still an LGBT person can be can have a major risk to their lives just because of their identity. Now, what is our selection criteria? So our selection criteria has to consider the government criteria, and that means that the refugee needs to be externally displaced person, have no durable solution, as we said, a convention refugee, a broad class or country of asylum class, and our mandate. Then we look for our mandate that person is an LGBTQ plus refugee suffering persecution. And then our referrals are either from the government, we get JAS referral and we get BVOR referrals. I put GAR there just because sometimes people arrive as GAR and then they're turned into a JAS case once they arrive here, and then they're referred to us. We also have referrals with our CGs and our organizations that we work with. We also get referrals from people from our community. So the difference between the way that we do sponsorship and maybe other organizations is that we don't get much referrals from family members. These are not families who are seeking the protection. Sometimes families are actually the people that these refugees are running away from and might be the people who are trying to harm them. So we receive referrals from community, and the majority also is self-referrals. So people who contact us through the telephone or they send us email and let us know that they're being persecuted, that they're in a certain country or other. Some people call us from their own country of origins, and then we have to explain to them that we are not able to sponsor them until they become a refugee, and for that they need to be externally displaced, which can be also a problem of security of the person making the determination to go to a different country and become a refugee so they can be sponsoring to Canada. And some people, after they receive that information, decide that they don't want to do that and they don't want to wait that long period of time. So sometimes they make it to Canada on their own and they become refugee claimants here. What are the considerations that we need to take that we need to consider? Is that, for instance, in a referral by the government, it is a verified case, or at least we would hope that it is a verified case, and they do have additional support and funding. And what we do is, considering the housing crisis and the economic crisis in Toronto, we sometimes top up what the government gives, and so it would allow a person to live in downtown Toronto, especially considering that an LGBT person might feel safer living in downtown Toronto. And then when an agency or a SCG does the referral, then we know that they are going to verify the case, and they also may have their own priorities. I know that Rainbow Railroad right now is prioritizing also people who are transgender or have other gender expressions and who might have a difficult visa post, which means a visa post that might take longer than 2 years, and that are cases that maybe other agencies wouldn't want to take because of the long wait times. And they're also prioritizing people who are in risk of violence, be physical violence or sexual violence. Now, when the community is the one who says, I know a friend, I want to sponsor this person, I was traveling, I met this person or other, we know already that there would be a team that would be formed. And we ask the person who's doing the referral if they would want to form a settlement team, which is a team of 5 or more people. And in that case, provide the support for a year for a person, and then they would have to also fundraise for that settlement. And then in the self-referrals, when a person contacts us directly through the phone or through an email, we have to identify an appropriate settlement team, and then we also assess the priorities. Like, for instance, is there an imminent risk to their life, a major risk of violence? Are they a marginalized person? We will speak a little bit more of that in the next slide, which is the last slide. And then also to clarify that we, when we are doing private sponsorship, we're under a special program, which is the Rainbow Wrap program. so the Rainbow Refugee Assistance Program, which means that we do not have allocations or caps. We can sponsor as many people as we can, as long as they're LGBT and we identify that in the application. However, at the moment, we are renegotiating the terms of that program, and we might hear back from the government in February to see how that program is going to continue. This is a blended program in which the government provides a startup fund and funds the first 3 months of the refugee settlement here. And we're hoping that it will be renewed as a multi-year and funded program. But we won't hear about this until the mid-February. Now, why it's important for us to have no allocations and no caps? Because we actually do not sponsor in great amount or in great numbers, and therefore it doesn't really impact the overall number of refugees being brought into the country. But it is important for us because we have never asked for allocations before. So if they were to impose those allocations, my side would have 0 allocations, and I would have to negotiate for some. The other challenges that we face when there's a self-referral is the verification process. So how do we verify that the person who's telling us their story, that story is actually true, especially when it hasn't been referred by anyone but by themselves? And so that can be a process that takes some Skype interviews, some reviewing of documents and record, and some consultation with local organizations. So finally, how the process works is that we get a contact, someone contacts us or someone refers a refugee. We do an initial assessment, intake to ensure eligibility and that they meet our mandate. We open a case file for eligible candidates that meet that criteria. We ask for more information on the case and their circumstances to understand what they're going through and what the emergency might be. And then we start a verification process depending on who has referred the person. That it can be a Skype interview with the LGBTQ refugee, a local LGBT organization that they're in contact with that can say, yes, we know this person and we know that about their identity and the struggles that they're going through. And as I said, review of documents and records. Then we create a priority list based on the date of contact and our target priorities. Like for instance, someone who is in imminent risk to their lives or in imminent risk of violence or sexual violence, or that have some other marginalizations criteria like a transgender individual, homelessness, unable to work and sustain themselves where they're staying at the moment, or some health consideration and disabilities that they might have in themselves. And then we also look for diversity in sponsorship and geographical location. The majority of people who have been sponsored so far and also who are referred to us by the DVOR program have been male, gay male. So we also try to diversify that and try to sponsor female identified people and trans people, although it might be more difficult and it might take longer time, just to give opportunity to other people who are at risk of their life to have a safer place and a new start. And then we try to find a good fit between the sponsor refugee and the CGE or the settlement team who will carry out the settlement. It is very important for us that the settlement team that will carry out the settlement is representative of the person that they're sponsoring. So that if we are sponsoring a trans person and we have a settlement team of 5 people, that at least 1 or 2 people are trans identified themselves, that they understand the cultural, especially the cultural specifics of that particular person, that they understand the barriers that they may face, that they understand what transition is, for instance. And then after we have matched the refugee with a constituent group or with a settlement team, that's when the application process starts. So I hope that I was able to give you an idea of how we do a process of selection of our refugees, and that you understand that because of our mandate, we exclusively sponsor LGBT refugees, and we try our best to match them with settlement teams and with constituent groups, and to provide them with a stable settlement for a year, and if it's a JAS case, probably for 2 years, and then at the end of those, to try to set them up for self-sufficiency and independent living, always under the premise that we want to empower them so that they can live a full life as much as they can, and that they are the people who are going to be making the major decisions on their lives from that point onwards. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you want to contact me or the program, you have my email address right here, and you also have my phone number and my extension. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex. A lot of really interesting, insightful information. I'd like to thank all three speakers, or all four speakers, for being so candid about the information you're sharing about their organizations. We do have some questions already coming in. I'm going to summarize. Two people are asking the same question. Basically, if it's Margaret and Kathy, they're both asking about your allocations, and they say, Kathy has framed it, are you comfortable to share with the group your allocations from 2017, so from last year? And Margaret is also asking, what would be the total cap for the SARS for all refugees or for private sponsorship? So anyone, sorry, I have to unmute you, Kwaka or Rebecca or Alex, if you are comfortable to share your allocations from past year or this year, and also the overall cap.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the overall cap is around 7,000 people on top of whatever government sponsorships are happening. So there's like, I think the allocation is 7,300 or some sort of number like that for the year.
Yeah, actually, sorry, this is Sarah again. I've looked it up earlier, and it was 8,500, and that doesn't include, for 2018, sorry, and that doesn't include cases that are being referred to the Blended Visa Office referred program. So for people who are new to refugee sponsorship, those are cases that, as Alex had mentioned, and others also, there are named cases, so full sponsorships, but there are also those that are referred by the UN Refugee Agency. If a SA wants to pick those up, then it doesn't count towards their allocations. Kwaka and Rebecca, do you have anything to add about the allocations for your SARS last year or this year, or how you feel about them, or anything like that?
Well, I guess this is Rebecca, I guess from my perspective, I think I kind of alluded to that I think for allocations, what makes it just makes managing our sponsorships that much more challenging. I think that is abundantly clear probably for almost all of our SAWs.
Kwaka or Melody, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think I agree with both Rebecca and Alex. So the allocations are really a challenge. However, there's been, for the United Church of Canada, we do all sorts of categories. So congregations continue to sponsor. So we continue to sponsor LGBT cases, and if there are Tibetan cases, we continue to do that. So congregations are always involved in sponsorship.
Right, thank you. Another question is coming from Kathy for Rebecca and Kwaka. How many cities across Canada do you work in? And could you speak about how many files that you submit or you have submitted historically? Did you do a lot of files in 1979 or since your creation?
So this is Kwaka for the United Church of Canada. So as mentioned earlier, we have a potential of over 3,000 congregations across the country, and we don't. The current agreement doesn't cover Quebec. So, but we sponsor well right across the country. BC and Ontario are usually the biggest sponsors.
And I guess as Rebecca, we sponsor British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario. They would be the three big provinces that we work with, and we have historically as well. In terms of cities, I don't know the number of cities, but we work with many cities across all provinces, but in particular those provinces.
Great, thank you. And a question for Alex. Does the church office do the immigration forms and contacts with IRCC, or do the CGs do this?
Well, we, in our partnership with Rainbow Railroad, usually they are the ones who, for instance, have the expertise already, and they do most of the filling of their applications, and then we just review and make sure that they're complete before they're sent to government. But we have all sorts of different takes on it. Depending on the CG and depending on their expertise, we can also provide help, and we can also do the applications ourselves. I would say that the only criteria that we're looking for is that the person who's going to be sponsored is an LGBT refugee, and that we will have a good settlement team for them to have a successful settlement for a year.
Great. We have a question that I think has already been answered about how many spots or how many files you're allowed to submit. Someone is asking whether that information is confidential. So how many, the number of files you submit every year or you plan to submit. If you could maybe just comment, any one of you who's interested to comment whether that's confidential or something publicly available.
It's publicly available. Sorry. This is Alex. So we don't have allocations or caps, and we make the number publicly available. We haven't sponsored that many people, around 27 to 30 people since we've started. That is also in collaboration with Rainbow Railroad. So it depends on our capacities and how many settlement teams we can form for a particular person asking to be sponsored.
Great.
Well, I can say too. I mean, for World Renew, yeah. I mean, I guess, is this confidential? I mean, it's not. I don't think it's out there in terms of. I don't really know where you would find it publicly the number of allocation spaces that each SAW gets every year. That I don't think it is available publicly. I could be wrong on that. But so in that case, that it tends to be something that isn't necessarily widely, publicly shared.
Yeah. And then a general question about the process, I guess. Marika is asking, and feel free for anyone to jump in and answer. We have about a minute or two left. Between when the constituent group is approved, how long do they usually wait for their privately sponsored refugee to arrive? So Marika, I'm assuming between the application for the actual sponsorship, between that time and the arrival of the person. But if you actually mean between the approval of the group itself, because that could be different in each organization, let me know. So this is about, I guess, about processing. Does anyone want to take that on? How much time usually wait?
Under our RAP program, I would say that from the moment that we submit an application until the person arrives, it can take around 18 months. From minimum, I would say 18 months or maybe 12 months to 6 years. It depends on the visa post that we are sponsoring from.
Approval of a CG, I mean, I don't know if that was part of the question, but approval of a CG can take, well, it can move extremely quick. It can kind of be done in a couple of weeks, or, depending on what's involved. Also, too, that CG needs to get approvals and needs to have its whole organization behind the sponsorship. So there's many factors that can dictate a short or lengthier time frame from which to approve a CG.
Correct. Yeah.
But an application, once it goes in, it's the processing time is definitely public. It's on the website by Visa Post. That's usually how it's presented. The information is there. Yeah.
And a couple of people have asked if the PowerPoint presentations would be made available. So yes, I'd just like to draw your attention to this slide that I have up. You can see on both on the Welcome Ontario website, welcomeontario.ca. If you click on and then page or past webinars, you will see the recording of all of the previous webinars, including this one, and with it the PowerPoint presentations. You can also see that we have 2 more webinars coming up. So on February 12th, we're going to shift focus on the discussion a little bit onto how SAs or how refugee sponsorship groups and settlement service organizations collaborate. And we have 2 promising practices or best practices to share with you. One is on February 12th with colleagues in the East Coast, actually in St. John, in New Brunswick, and then we have another example from Ottawa on March 19th. So the link to that is on welcomeontario.ca, but also you will receive tomorrow a follow-up email that has a link to the today's webinar, as well as an evaluation. We would really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes. There are just 4 questions in the evaluation survey to evaluate this particular webinar, what you liked about it, what you had wished you hoped to get from it, just so we can know what else it is that you'd like to hear more about. And finally, I'd like to thank our guest speakers. Thank you so much, Kwaka, Melody, Alex, and Rebecca, for sharing all of this information about the organizations with us. I hope it gave everyone a little bit more of an understanding that there's a lot of diversity out there in the SAO community, and each organization functions slightly differently based on their mandate and their vision. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our guest speakers, especially for taking the time and sharing. Thank you.